Kaladher Voruganti, Vice President of Technology and Senior Fellow at Equinix, along with his colleague Doron Hendel, Global Business Development, Ecosystem Development, Partnerships, and Alliances, led a 1 hour discussion of AI development and ethics with 9 USC students studying and working with AI. Here are 10 minutes of highlights from the session.
You can pretty quickly tell if it's a script or rule based, as Kaladar called it, which is what they used in the past. They have these scripts, right, where they throw questions at you, and based on the answers, they'll go to the next question. The better way, or the AI way, is more natural. You feel like they kind of know a little bit about you. You get a feeling that the questions are more targeted at who you are and what you do. And you can tell right away, even the language is more natural.
I can quickly see that how it's majorly built on American accent. And me coming from India, it's not able to detect everything correctly. And with all the online classes going on Zoom, on Blackboard, we see that they have their transcriptions, live transcription of the what professor is saying or what anyone else is saying. But again, we find that professors with different country origins find that their accents are not properly recognized by them. It doesn't make that many mistakes for an American professor, whereas for any other professor of different origin, it's making much more mistakes.
I recently actually wrote a research paper about the bias in YouTube's demonetization algorithm because it was found that they were disproportionately demonetizing LGBT creators. Let's just say an LGBT creator has a 0.2% higher chance of making content that's like not suitable for advertisers. And also YouTube's demonetization algorithm is like very, very flawed already. It'd be one thing if they just like kind of never got it exactly right with anybody. But when it's certain groups, you have to look at it and think like, all right, like this is a different issue and maybe a bigger issue.
So there has to be some kind of oversight committee. But also there is a technology play here that has to also help. Most AI models are not built from scratch. You usually use the model from someone else, and then you add your own data and you improve that model. An AI model needs a metadata, which is the lineage information, which talks about all the data sets that have been used, all the previous models that have been used. And what we are providing at Equinix today is what we call as a neutral, secure sandbox. And we will let you build your model, and we will keep track of all the steps that you have taken in building this model, put it on a blockchain ledger, and that will keep track of the lineage of this model, and we'll certify it. Then you can go look at the metadata for that model and trust it and say, oh, okay, this data was used on only American citizens, or only this other data sources. That way, then you can decide whether, hey, is this really, the oversight committee that I talked about can decide, hey, is this model really something that we want to monetize or sell as a company because it has so many biases in it?
I wanted to ask about other ways that you as a business leader can put some guardrails on the development of AI within a company, especially because AI is becoming more democratized. It's not just the engineers now who are creating these tools. With tools like Uncork and Salesforce, a lot of people from outside of the IT department are making AI tools. So how do you stop them from gathering data that is incorrect or using a biased algorithm?
So first step is to get a catalog. And then the second step is any data that is coming in has to go through certain checks, quality assurance, what we call as a new job role called a data curator. These are people who will basically talk to the finance team. They will talk to the legal team. They'll talk to the IT team. They'll talk to the line of business group. And their job is to basically curate and say, this data is okay, you should use it.
Something like visual data is a lot less biased in some senses than, I guess, natural language processing. So I guess when you're creating like a computer vision data set, like a Sci-Far 10 or something, as something like that starts to expand and be a little bit more, I guess, robust and have like a wider breadth of objects, I feel like that's something that could be standardized. We're able to take those weights and kind of what has been trained from there and then expand on it, and it ends up actually training our model faster. Something like a standard object detection data set could be, which some of those pretty much exist already, but I think as that expands, I think that domain in particular could be very valuable for standardized data set.
First of all, governments are starting to put, rules on data sharing, data distribution. Industries will create their own, if you will, data sharing mechanisms. Now, creating global databases for a lot of information is a tough problem to solve, both technologically and from a regulatory perspective. Until I think data security and data privacy is taken care of in a very, very successful way, it's going to be very tough to create these huge data repositories for AI.
One thing that would maybe be nice is if we had a little more control over what data was shared. And I know it's all in the terms and conditions, obviously, but if you want to use Facebook, you have to let them do all of that. And if you don't want them to do all of that, then you have to just not use it. Maybe if there could be some way to kind of choose how much of that you're sacrificing exactly instead of more all or nothing.
There have been efforts to do personal data marketplaces. Have any of you heard of them? Just show of hands, because I can see you. None of you have. Okay, good to know.
So Microsoft has a solution in play right now. It's called decentralized ID. And so what they do is that if you go and search, there's a very nice white paper you can read. And basically what they let you do is basically control your documents like your passport, your driver's license, so that third parties can validate based on blockchain technology. So basically you can give permission to third parties on what data they can access for how long they can access it. I think the combination of control, combination of lineage tracking, and combination of where the models are being built all have to be brought together in order to basically at least give some control to the end users on their own private data.
As AI's ability to recommend starts to become more and more powerful, right? And as these predictions start to become more accurate, I think there comes a point where the recommendations are also able to sway you a little bit. AI knows what you will and will not react to, and can kind of nudge you in a certain direction, right? If you take this idea of AI being able to recommend and project it forward, I think it kind of to a certain extent does pose a threat to political structure. One thing that was never talked about is the problem of data transfer. Just the information of what's going on in this massive country was never able to be centralized and processed, and then the instructions cast back out efficiently. What AI does is it really starts to change that. Before, what really worked was you allow a local government to really govern over things that are pertinent to its own region, because that would be faster. What's happening now is cell phones, even just everyone's individual cell phone is able to transmit so much data. If this starts to become something that can become centralized in a government, if they're able to capture that much data about their population, and then also use tools of AI to process that efficiently and relevantly, I think that could really potentially pose a threat to democracy itself, because it makes a centrally planned, like an authoritarian regime, potentially a lot more effective, because they really know exactly what's going on in their entire country.
I actually thought a lot about it, and I think we're already seeing this happening in the world of internet. We're going towards a world called splinternet. So there will be one set of networks, routers, data being available, apps for all US and US friendly companies, one for CCP and their friendly countries, and then one for potential European countries. And they will still need to integrate or interact with each other at certain points, but those will be highly regulated and scrutinized. And what you have said about citizens being monitored and citizens having a rating. And what is to say that that is not happening in other places? Just by correlating my cell phone data and my credit card data, you can have a pretty good idea, 80% of what I'm doing in my life, essentially.
Right now, there's just definitely this massive divide between like people who technically understand what's going on, and then the rest of the population, which is kind of just like kind of going by. They know their data is being sold. Do you think it would be valuable to make this kind of like a mandated education for students in terms of what exactly is happening in the I guess in the data processing sector and everything?
So go back to what Cal said, the world is breaking into three parts, China, the US, and Europe. And over in Europe, they're doing that. In the US, I'm sure there'd be strong resistance. And over in China, the ethical base and the culture are very different. As we talk about ethics and other issues here in the States, we're also letting China's AI in. If you grew up in a world dominated by AI, that would just be natural and you wouldn't realize that you were being controlled.